You've decided on a format and how the path along which whatever story is going to be to develop. How did you come? How did the story come?
It was through a lot of things, but we went into a lab and we talked a lot about why we wanted to make something over that length of time, and I think everyone that knew the idea thought that we were going to make something about two people having an affair. Like there was this kind of general consensus, like, oh, every Tuesday, that'll be an affair. And I think we wanted to maybe look at a relationship that was very important, that wasn't necessarily romantic, you know, as its central relationship. And we were very interested in characters that embodied the promise of change, that didn't necessarily have to change in the story, but that we as an audience were expecting them to change and they were expecting themselves to change. And that combined with kind of an interest in parenthood and being a parent, that's sort of working out how to show their full selves to the child, not just like mother, you know, but maybe in this case mother and man, and trying to kind of bring those two things together into sort of one idea is sort of what drove the finding of those characters, I think.
Yeah, and the coming of age aspect obviously as well, and it's kind of, you know, one of the big steps into adulthood is getting to that point where you see your parent, not just as your parent, but as a person,
absolutely,
and as flawed as anyone else, and you know that's a big part of the story as well.
I mean, that's a huge part of. I mean, I think that's what happens in the film is we all do it at really different ages, don't we? Like some kids know their parents as adults really young, and some people don't discover it until they're quite old. You know, to see your parent as an adult, as a real person, and to be able to decide what kind of relationship do I want with them, or do I want a relationship with them, is something we all go through. Billy does it in the film.
So Tilda, we're just talking just before we came in. I mean, this was your first film, and what a huge undertaking! Not just a short of a limited period, but a big commitment for a year, and especially at your age. I mean, that's a big portion of your life. So how did you come on board on that film, and how was it? As I say, a huge undertaking. And what was your thoughts, you know, going into actually making it?
I think I probably didn't think huge amounts about what that was going to be. I was like, yeah, it's a great idea, sounds great. And then at the end, like halfway through the year, you're like, whoa, this is huge. And I think we all kind of did that. We were so ready. I feel like as a team, everyone was so ready to come on board that experiment of trying to make something out of the form of how normal film was created or stories are told. Not that I knew what that was, and that's the other funny thing is I guess I'd never worked on a film before, so I mean strangely it kind of makes sense to shoot it in order and over time and not know what's going to happen, and like it was, I think if I'd worked on something before it would have been much harder to let go of that. It was a very huge undertaking in terms of sort of getting involved in doing that sort of performance and being within that for a year. But it was fantastic. So I ended up going to an open audition and had read the character description that was like really bold and like sexually aware, and at that point I was like 16, never had a boyfriend. I was like, oh, that's not me, but I'll go. And it was a really interesting process where we played a whole lot of games and you talked to us about a whole lot of things. And
I asked them about their mums.
Yeah. And then I felt really crazy, and so he was like, oh yeah, maybe come back for another audition. I was like, what is this? And I think something that we really connected on was I grew up doing devised theatre, and was very used to the idea of getting set tasks and not knowing what the end was going to be. Like, I've never read a script or even done a school play. Like, I was ready to go in just going, well, I don't know, we'll just talk about it and see what happens. And that was amazing to be a part of, to change so much over a year. Like 16 to 17 is a huge time in anyone's life, no matter what's happening. But I was sort of living it through two teenagers or something, which was very weird. And it was that thing that I think we got all caught in a lot, was it was like, is that Tilda or Billy? Or like, who's influencing who? Or where does that, what happens at the end of that? Like, where are you left from that? And I watch it, and it doesn't feel like me or what that experience was for me, but it's very confusing. And also everyone calls me Tilly, so it even rhymes. Tilly. It's really so stressful. Yeah.
Because that aspect really interested me, you know, because as you just said just there, you know, big pivotal year in your life, and what did you find out about yourself through the process of making the film?
So everything. It's so weird when people go like, how did it change you, or what do you think you learnt from it? Because kind of everything. It sounds so dorky to say that it's like the life-changing experience, but it is. Like, it is. You can't help that. I don't know what I'd be without that, because it was a year and you're constantly challenged and you're constantly being asked things that you wouldn't think about at that point in time. So yeah, I mean, everything changed. Everything was challenged. Yeah.
And in terms of the story, was it set in stone at the beginning of the year, or did it evolve in a week? 'Cause how long before shooting, how long before Tuesday would you get a script?
1 week. So we'd, at the end of that day of shooting, we'd get the script for the next week. Sometimes if it was like a really something that we had to rehearse a bit more, we'd find out about the content a bit earlier. But it was the most stressful part was, you know, my dad's in the hospital. I thought he was dead for that whole day of shooting, and it was like, get me to the end of the day because I need to read the next script. Like, it was horrifying, and it is like living in a choose your own adventure novel. Like, it's kind of terrifying and thrilling. And I think that kept everyone. I mean, that was why you said you also did it, was because you don't want anyone to get bored of what that story is.
And also we didn't know what was going to happen, so we were writing it as we went. So yeah, we didn't want these guys to get bored, of course, because you're playing the role. To play the same journey for so long, you know, or to play increments of the same journey is really hard over that amount of time. But I think to stay where the character is not as hard, or as, you know.
And we'd also only get our scenes, so we didn't know what was going on in other people's storylines.
Yeah.
So you'd only find elements of their storyline as it revealed to your character.
Yeah.
So that, because, you know, I think. I was just saying to you, I didn't read anything about the film until I'd actually seen it, and I was very surprised to read that it was your first film. It's such a strong performance, and Del as well. Tell me how Del, they came on board, because they were initially on as a consultant.
Yeah,
is
that's
that right?
So Del we were talking to a lot of people about, I guess, gender diversity. We were trying to understand different gender experiences, and one of those people was Del. Just to be really clear, you know, the character of James in the film identifies as a trans man, or a man, I suppose, and Del doesn't. Del identifies as non-conforming, gender non-conforming, so it doesn't even conform to the idea of male or female. And but we started talking because I was interested in the broad spectrum of gender experience, I suppose, even though I knew that I had very much a trans man in the story.
Yes.
And for me, it was a very natural process actually casting Del, because we were talking and it was like, oh, Del's the same age, we live in the same city, and we had to shoot in that city. Del had done some performance stuff, some like singing, has an amazing voice, and it was like, oh, do you want a screen test? And it happened very, you know, gently, I suppose. And it was important to me, they're very different characters. Like Del and James are very, very different, but they do share a similar experience of being treated differently from how they feel themselves. And I think that was a really important thing for all of us on the set, to have. So that's how. It was all really, like, casting these guys felt, you know, they were the biggest kind of open audition, the 3 teenagers. And everyone else was kind of people we knew, or friends, people that kind of slotted into the roles, or that we felt would show a different side to the roles than what kind of conventional actors might.
Yes, yeah. And did you have an instinct with both of them, or did you just see how they?
Yeah,
I think you often get an instinct, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
weirdly, we found out into shooting that I even knew Del when I was younger.
Yeah. That's
Adelaide.
what Adelaide's
Yeah.
our town.
No, I should have.
Did you know the other 2 young actors?
Yes, and this is really hilarious. So Imogen, I've been best friends with since I was 5, and Sam was who I first sat next to in high school. and was like in the same classes with him the whole time. So then that was an amazing thing as well. Like we all knew each other really well. And that was really great because there was like a shorthand, like you were so ready. It wasn't hard to pretend they're your best friends. But there are moments of that are really challenging because you have a relationship with someone and then you're like, oh, but now we're playing kind of different versions of ourselves and having to do things that we wouldn't usually do with each other. Like that was a strange...
And Imogen and Jasmine must be the most different people in the world, the character and the actor.
Sort of,
like,
yeah.
But, and also I think Sam was a year younger than Imogen at school and he was slightly frightened of her.
And loved, like, yeah.
So those first few scenes where they really have to like be intimate with each other.
He was the first one that actually told me about the film.
Yeah.
He'd found out about it through doing work experience and then proceeded to ask all of my attractive friends if they wanted to audition. Because then I turned up and he was like, oh.
Oh, it's you.
Yeah.
And in terms of not just your first film, but having to do those scenes, those intimate scenes, and experiencing things that you haven't even experienced in your real life. I mean, as a director, I mean, there's a big responsibility to you there to make sure everyone's okay. So just talk me through that. How do you negotiate?
Go.
Yeah.
Take it all off.
Action!
No, Sophie's amazing. And like as I said, I read the character description and went, like, I don't think I can do that for you. I remember having a really frank conversation with you at the beginning, going, like, I don't think I can take my clothes off. And you were like, okay, fine, because the first scene of the film was meant to be, I was in the shower and just having a conversation with my mum. And you were like, oh, we'll just change it. And it was an amazing thing, I think, to go, oh, right, yeah, you can just do that because there isn't a script written, and it was always a conversation. So between all of us, all the time, you were always being asked if that was fine or how you could do that. So it never felt scary at all, and often they were the easier scenes to do because you talked about them heaps and we'd always rehearse them. And
It's funny because like it's a very different way of making a film with someone because usually, you know, you have a script and you ask a young actor or any actor to sign off on it. Like, sign off that you'll do all this stuff I want you to do in this script, and they know what it is, and so they can. And then you're like, I can do whatever I want with you because it's, you know, there. With these guys, we didn't know what it was, and so we couldn't make that kind of contract. The contract that we had to make was to keep recommitting to each other and the film, you know. Anyone could have really walked away if they wanted to. And to be able to do kind of the sex scenes in particular, things like that, you know, these guys had to feel like it was something that they felt was really necessary for the story as well and for the character, and also something they were comfortable to do. And so it was always a negotiation between us. It was never just like, do this. It always had to be that we got to the same place together. Yeah, and their parents as well, their parents. Which was hilarious.
That was hilarious.
Because I would write these ridiculous emails to their parents.
Because they were really sort of... I didn't show my parents any of the other scripts, and then they'd get these emails going like, you know, Sam puts his foot up her, and I was going, oh my God, and then I have to sit at dinner going like, you don't know anything about anything else that's going on.
And it's much less explicit than kind of the ideas of it are.
So when you describe it, it sounds more full on.
Yeah.
It conjures up a lot of images, but it's a 12A film, so it wasn't going to go too far, was it?
Yeah.
Go for it.
And it all feels very natural and as part of the story, doesn't it, as well? And another big aspect of the film as well is the whole idea of both your character and James, the self-recording idea. So how did you come across that kind of thread, Sophie?
Yeah, look, we always had in our minds that James would set out to record his physical change.
Because it's a huge part, I think, transitioning now, you know, the YouTube videos,
really is,
and, you know, before and after photos.
And it is amazing. Like, we're all, like, interested in that. We really wanted it to start, and we always knew it wouldn't keep going. We wanted it to be, like, the beginning, but that wasn't the thing we were interested in. The physical transition wasn't the thing. We were always interested in, but what else is there? What other part of you is what are you uncovering about yourself, or being able to reveal about yourself, you know? And so we wanted to set James off on that. And weirdly, the mirroring that happened with Billy doing that kind of came out through the process. That wasn't part of the original story. And partly it was a mirroring of James was trying to sort of see the change in himself on camera. And Billy also felt like she needed to see something that she couldn't work out as well. And It was.
Everyone records everything now
Yeah.
as well, which is something that I think we always talked about a lot.
Mm.
Of, you know, everyone takes photos of their food. Like, it's everywhere. It's just what you do, and that's an interesting discussion, I think.
I think, you know, the difference here is that both the characters are sharing their most intimate and innermost things, and, you know, your character as well. You're on a big journey of self-discovery yourself. I think in James's case, he's always had a feeling how he is. I mean, this has been a long time building up to it. So when it does happen, it kind of feels like the character's just thrown in there. All of a sudden, she's come home, and it's just like. It's like,
and I think that's the thing that Billy's, you know, struggling with in the film. Not actually the fact that her mum is saying, you know, I'm gonna, you know, now live as a man, like, but that it's like I didn't know about it and I can't be around for it and a whole lot of those things, which was an important thing that we wanted to do, is not make a teenager who was like, what the fuck, you know, like, or kind of just have that instant rebellion, because a lot of teenagers, you know, or a lot of people aren't like that. We want the people around us to be happy, and we want to help them do that, even if, you know, then we start going, oh, I also feel things about this later on.
Well, I think what's interesting about your character as well, you know, especially at the end of the year, is kind of like that preconceived idea a lot of people who aren't trans thinks what transition's about, and it's just when your character's asking, it's like, where you still look the same.
When are you going to change?
And so tell me how you did, once you sort of had the idea for the character, how did you decide how that story would unfold?
Gosh.
Because you could have gone for a very kind of easy way, could you really? But it's very, very nuanced, and I really loved the bit as well where James goes out to San Francisco and he's using real bits. Yeah,
and so much of it sort of happened over the year, but I guess, you know, we were very interested in not just like if you're changing and you're going to live as a man, finally, you know, there's a point where you have to also work out, like, well, what kind of man am I going to be, do you know? Not just be content with, like, and now man, you know? How did we do it? Part of it was that James was such a set character, because James was the one that drove the Tuesday rule, which was a big part of our film, you know? James had to be someone that wanted to segregate his life, like separate things in his life and box the relationship into one portion. And so that's a very specific kind of character. You know, we couldn't have a really free character, or we couldn't have someone who was very free in that time. So in a lot of ways, that part of it really drove, you know, what was happening for him, and his journey, I suppose. I love the San Francisco a bit too, because I felt at times that James did this thing where he's separated from the rest of his life for this year, and at a point it was like, when do you go, God, I just need to get back out into a community or a group of people that I can be around again, and think about being really public with, not just sort of around my family. And that was such a, also we had been reading so much stuff, but in particular a magazine called Original Plumbing and an online blog. And like, those guys were really influential to us, like, and so we met them, and one of them's the editor of Original Plumbing is one of the interviewees, and so it was incredible to do that, and for Del as well, I think, for all of us to go and do that. Yeah. How did we come up with the journey? It's so hard for us to know now, because so much of it sort of just happened throughout the year, you know, keep moving forward. It was certainly really interesting when the decision was made to not have the character having hormones. And that was really intriguing, because it was like we really had to question, all of us and the character, well, what is it that makes a man then? What is it that, is this all it is? Is it, you know, if you take that bit away, how do you still fulfill this for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? Yeah. And how do you still show and be, you know, real with who you are? Yeah.
And I think especially in terms of the rest of the public's perception, because you look at like tabloid stories, they're always focused on the processes, aren't they? And if someone hasn't got those strictly defined processes, then their kind of identity gets invalidated.
Exactly. And the idea that just the visual is your gender anyway is still so present in the world, isn't it? Like,
yeah, and I think, you know, on a certain level that is hardwired into us
Yeah.
But you know, we're an intelligent species. We've got the power of reflection and thought on that. There's certain things that are hardwired into us as well, and it's kind of, that's why I think people can get a bit uncomfortable with trans generally, because it's kind of that little rug's pulled away.
Oh,
and
yeah. I mean, I think
throw a lot of things into question.
It's like, it's very challenging. It's more challenging than I had imagined, you know, for people. And, you know, I really think it's because we are just so bloody gendered, aren't we? Like, it's so pervasive, and it's like the number one thing that we think of as our identity, really. And you start to really uncover that. And, you know, I think that a lot of people find it very unsatisfying. I think it is a limiting idea, you know. And I think we need to have a lot more conversation about this, you know, now in the world. Because I don't think it's just people who are trans or gender non-conforming or genderqueer who feel that. I think heaps of people feel that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because I remember a conversation I had with a close friend of mine who's never, like, I mean, she's happy to be identified as female, but she's always not quite sat with that, and it's about questioning. There's no right way to be a man or a woman or a person. A lot of that is forced on us by society, and you know, I think another aspect as well is why people get so angry and aggressive about it. It's directed towards trans and non-conforming people of any description, because it forces them to ask questions about themselves. And a good film should leave the viewer as well, and yours certainly does, asking questions about themselves, about identity.
Yeah, but I mean, it is so crazy, isn't it, that I can't go away and talk about someone without naming their gender all the time, even if it's completely irrelevant, because for some reason we believe it isn't irrelevant in every situation. Yeah.
Right, we're going to open
Talk
up.
about that forever.
Yes. We're going to open up to some questions now. I'm sure there's some good questions here. So who'd like to start? Have one by here.
You touched on the interesting dynamic with school, with your co-stars actually being in the same school or having known one another for such a long time. I wonder if you could talk about how this filming over the course of a year affected your school life.
That's a good question. I don't know. It was sort of, to me, making 52 Tuesdays was like Billy's version of going off with the teenagers. It was like, I didn't really talk about it to anyone else much. I mean, it's very hard when you're working on something that specific and intimate with a group of people. It's very hard to describe that to other people. So I guess it didn't, and I was also doing my last year of school. It was my final year of high school. And I was pretty nerdy and was just at school to work. Like, I didn't stay for lunches, or, like, I would just go there and do the stuff and then go home. So I think in terms of the film, I think because it was such an inspiring experience, it actually gave a lot of energy to the work I was doing at school. At school, I also did things like English, drama, and art. So, you know, it was a very different year than a lot of people's school years.
Time-consuming, I think, is the answer.
Yeah.
As in, like, to
And
draw or not.
if filming was always on a Tuesday,
I just got that off.
you just got every Tuesday off of school.
On Tuesdays,
right.
yeah.
Okay.
So I guess people knew that I wasn't around on a Tuesday. And in terms of our, like, Imogen, it was a year older than me. So she wasn't at school in the for quite the most of the film. And Sam and I were at school together, and we were sort of in the same group, but also had a very separate relationship outside of this. It was a very like a little secret world, I think, that we all went off into. So they were quite separate parts of my life.
All of the cast, although the few of us that made the film, the crew, there was only a few people on set at a time. It was very tiny, and Matt, the writer, and Brian, cinematographer, editor, and I were on all the time, full time all week, because we were writing and getting everything ready and whatever. And a few other crew members would rotate depending on whether they had work at the time, you know. But the cast all did other things. So those guys were at school and the others were all working. But they always would have the Tuesday if we needed them. And we would rehearse 2 times a week usually. So, but that would juggle around everyone's times depending on who was in the scene. And sometimes it was really quick. It was just that go to the house, have a cup of tea, talk about the scene, meet again on Monday. It was always good to do a few rather than one big long one for us. Yeah, which was, I just have to say, incredible to do, because you get to talk about all the ideas behind it all the time, but you never talk about that on set. On set, you just have to do it, and that's a really rare privilege, I think.
And so rare in film that you ever rehearse anything. Like, most of the time you've just read the script and then you turn up and someone's like, stand there, do it. And it's like a very different, and it's all out of order and all of that. So having the ability to practice bits or talk around what that thing was. And Matt, the writer, was often in the room as well. So you go, I don't know what that means, or like, why does that happen? And Matt will go, either for this reason or let's change it. And that was amazing too. Yeah.
Can I just ask you, Tilda,
Yes.
You said your parents were a little bit, you were protective of them in the beginning. How did they feel about the film when they saw it?
Protective about what it...
I thought you said in the beginning you were a bit protective with the sex when you were...
Oh, talking to them
talking
about
to
it.
The parents, yeah.
Yeah, look, my parents are very much in the arts, like sort of more live theatre world. And they're so open with me, like, well, let me do whatever. You know, it was very easy, but it was an interesting thing to go, when it is your own child doing that stuff, it is actually just hard to talk about. And I think that surprised them a lot. And it made us have amazing discussions about, they were like, I'm finding that part a bit challenging. And you'd go, why? And they were like, like it was kind of hard to talk about why or what that was, other than it wasn't the norm or what. That caused a lot of interesting discussion. When my parents saw it, I think, in terms of the sexual content, they're like, oh, that's all. Like, had expected something much greater or difficult, and it's kind of dorky and, you know, it's fun. So they were very relaxed about it all. But it was a weird thing. It was the first thing. I'm still super close to my parents, and it was the first thing I'd kind of done apart from them, which was an interesting thing as well. It was like the ultimate life imitating art year, because I was sort of being Billy in my own life by segregating all this other stuff and like not telling people about it, and sort of growing up apart from my parents, but also doing that in a very different way in the film. It was strange, yeah.
We've got time for one more question.
I was just, I enjoyed the film very much. I was just wondering what your ideas are for the future in film.
Well, I'm writing a film at the moment, which is actually, I'm writing it with Matt, who wrote this, and it's actually two films that are companion films. And one is a film that is set in 1894 about Marie Curie, the scientist, set in Poland. And the other film is a film set now about the actor playing Marie Curie in the other film. So sort of like this, it's messing with the form a little bit. It's not going to be combined, we don't think. They'll be separate, but you can, you know, they have parallels and they have, you know, the same actors, for instance. So I make a lot of documentaries, and so we continue to do that in the company. And but yeah, that's the film I'm writing, if we can ever get it up. It's a pretty hard film to finance. Yeah.
I just can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Just in terms of trans in Australia generally, and in terms of, because one of the biggest things on social media this year has been Caitlyn Jenner. You know, the reaction in America, she's not representative of most trans people's existence, especially for trans people of colour. In terms of Australian narratives, what was the background? How is it perceived generally in more mainstream media, in the newspaper, and what kind of education is there in schools? I mean, what's the background you're coming out of? This film, being seen in it.
Look, it is fairly invisible actually in Australia. It isn't. I mean, there's small, you know, of course, there's pockets and communities and stuff.
Hardly conservative.
Yeah, look, you know, going to the States, you know, as much as there's always negativity as well, there's also all that, like, trans education stuff in schools, which is kind of amazing, you know, in certain parts of the country. We don't have that, that's for sure. There are some incredible, you know, of course, like anything, there are some fantastic, incredible groups who are really vocal and really progressive and everything. But it's not something that most of the country is talking about. Even with all the stuff going on right now, it's not very visible. Yeah. And also, I mean, Australia is I mean, you've seen Australian films. There's a very kind of there's a lot of masculine energy in Australian films, and men that don't know how to talk to each other is a big theme in Australian films, and you know it's a gendered country, yeah, but not always. Like anything, yeah.
There's bubbles. Yeah, I think we both also live within that bubble of, you know, for the first, until I think when I was 13, I went to my first legal wedding, and before that I'd been to like 5 that were gay weddings. I mean, it's so crazy that they're not legal, but it was, I think I came into this project, it not being an issue at all, and then you talk to the people and you go, oh right, that's like not normal, or something, and we just came from a different way of that, but generally I think Australia is very backward in that.
Yeah, that's right. And but at the same time, I suppose what we wanted to do with these characters is put people that felt familiar to us on screen and people that we hadn't seen on screen much.
Yeah.
And so we say all of that, but they're the people we know, you know. Yeah. But I guess you find your people all over the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm afraid we're glad to leave it there. Everyone
Yeah.
will Sorry about that.
Thank you. Well, can I just say too, like, we're a tiny little film, as you know, and it's open now in the cinemas. And please tell your friends if you liked it, or even if you just want to talk to them about it, because that's fine too. But the only way it really gets known about is for you guys to tell people. So please,
We will.
do. Thank you.
So is it on general release then?
I believe so.
Yeah,
Is it here?
Well, it's not here, but yeah, it's in some cinemas throughout the country. But yeah, it tends to be smaller cinemas like us.
Yeah.
But Peccadillo, who are releasing it, they're really good at doing follow-up work. So hopefully it'll be on DVD and Blu-ray.
It will. Yeah.
Fairly soon as well. If your friends don't have a chance to see it this week when it's in chapter.
Yeah, and if you come to the website, which is my52tuesdays.com, you can see a list of where it is playing all over the country. So yeah.
I know it's in Bristol this week as well.
Yeah, Bristol this week. And I think it's doing some special screenings and educational screenings too. So it is around. Yeah. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.